Now, why would mental restlessness develop in ADHD? Why would it start out being physical in children, not mental? It's just overt hyperactivity, restless behavior, fidgeting, and so on. But it's also then associated with impatience, hostility, as well as poor emotion regulation, the irritability that some people talk about. Why would it go from being overt to covert? And I think the answer to that comes from my theory of executive functioning. So that theory says that there are three important processes taking place across child and adolescent development in which behavior goes from being external to being internal or mental in form. First of all, we engage in self-directed actions. This starts at around 3 to 5 years of age, when children start to talk to themselves. So I'm going to use speech as a good example of this. Before 3 years of age, children talk to the world. But between 3 and 5, they start to talk to themselves, even when nobody's in the room. Now, by 5 to 7, this speech has become quiet. It's whispering, such as. And later in childhood, the outward signs of speaking disappear, and children now report having a voice in their head, a voice in the mind, inner speech. So behavior goes from being externally directed to self-directed to mental, and that's all because of inhibition. We're inhibiting the motor aspects of our behavior. We're inhibiting the spinal cord so that we can think without action. All right, so next in that is that these become private in form. That's that last stage of developing executive functioning, where we can now do things in our head without moving. We can talk, we can think, we can act. I can practice my golf swing. And you can't see that happening. So there's a privatization of behavior that occurs mainly, if not exclusively, in humans, that's occurring across development. It creates a mental world in which we can act, think, talk in mental form without our body engaging in those actual overt actions. Just as important is, as this privatization and internalization are taking place, they become more and more regulatory. They start to govern our behavior increasingly so that we can do what we think. Thinking guides action. That's also important because that is a major aspect of self-regulation. You see, children are stimulus response creatures. They're externally directed. So events are happening and they're reacting to those. There's nothing mental going on in the mind of someone, let's say, who's a preschooler. But as they develop, look at what's going to happen. Things are going to happen to them, events. They're going to have mental reactions to these. They're going to be talking to themselves, seeing to themselves, emoting to themselves, and that's going to lead to certain actions. This is the stage at which inner or mental representations can be used to guide external actions. But we can still see a lot of this happening overtly. So finally, by late childhood and especially by adulthood, we can do all of this in our head. We have a form of mental simulation. We can create images, words, statements, impressions, and we can use them to guide action over time to our goals. We have an inner life, which is why humans have an inner self and an outer self, whereas children just have the outer self. Now, can you see how this links up with how we go from overt to mental restlessness? It's because there's a delay in this development of executive functioning. So that people with ADHD are acting more overtly and outwardly. They're talking, they're touching, they're moving, they're restless, and are doing so longer into development than typical people. But eventually, even those with ADHD do begin to internalize these actions, and they go from being public to private, outward to mental. And as they go from being outward to inward actions, that hyperactivity, that restlessness, that impatience that we were seeing in children also goes from being overt to mental. And I think that is the origin of that mental restlessness. After all, if our mental life is our actions and our words in private, if you're already restless and impatient and hyperactive and talkative, by the time you're an adult, those become internal. And you now have this mental form of restlessness, which can be very disruptive. So, and I think that's how we get from childhood hyperactivity and excessive talking to adults reporting on mental restlessness. So, in conclusion, this mental and unobservable symptom, in its very nature, will prove to be highly disruptive in day-to-day functioning, leading to impairments in multiple domains. This may be related to the increasing development of risk for regret and demoralization, and possibly for the development of anxiety, and maybe even depression in those with ADHD. After all, if your mind is difficult to control and it's leading you to be making decisions that you later regret, it doesn't take long for that to have some kind of emotional aspect to it, side effects of that kind of inner mental restlessness and decision making. We know that the inner restlessness is just as responsive to treatment with ADHD medications as the outward hyperactivity and talkativeness is in ADHD children. So good thing. This is really a symptom of ADHD, and it is a symptom that can be managed with ADHD medications. It's also something that can be further managed through the use of the cognitive behavior therapy programs that target executive deficits in adults with ADHD. Programs such as those by Mary Salanto, Russ Ramsey, Steve Safran, and more recently those by Laura Naus and her colleagues for college students as well. You can find all of these by Googling them, or just go to Amazon or any major bookseller and you can type in these authors' names and you'll find their books. It might be possible that mindfulness-based practices could be of some help to managing this mental restlessness. I don't know. I'll have to take a look at John Mitchell and Lydia Zylowska's book on that subject, Mindfulness-Based Practices for Adults with ADHD. But I would think that that kind of mindfulness might help to slow down this mental restlessness, though I would think that just as with CBT or cognitive behavior therapy, they would not be as effective as the medications would be. But put them all together and you probably have a good treatment package for managing not just ADHD symptoms generally, but this problem with mental restlessness.